Hello and welcome, everybody. This is another episode of the Catholic Money Mastermind, the podcast produced by the Catholic Financial Planners Network. And I have another member joining me today, Nick Shiver from Columbia, South Carolina. We're going to have some fun conversation. I have no doubts because someone new to me, and maybe even new to Nick, I've recently discovered that both Nick and I have master's degrees in philosophy. And so, watch out, folks. We're gonna have a philosophical conversation, and so you'll see what's fun, how this goes. But Nick, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background and letting the audience know a bit more about you, we'd appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ben. I'm excited to talk all things philosophy and wherever else the conversation leads today. But I'm a wealth advisor for an independent advisory firm out of Columbia, South Carolina, called Water Advisors. And we try to build comprehensive financial plans, want to have comprehensive, personalized guidance, objective, the best we can for folks, not just with investments, but everything they're kind of, they're seeing on their financial picture. So I love to be able to incorporate, what I believe in and care about the most into my relationships with clients, and as I know everybody in this network does. So it's fun being able to bring that out and to be able to serve clients who have those same beliefs and care about them just like we do. Not just the investment side, which I think is talked about the most, but also just informing, holistic relationships and meaningful plans around what's most important in life. So it's been fun for me to do that. And, Ben, I think we also share a little bit of a background with some formation in our past. So I was a diocesan seminary for the Diocese of Charleston for about 4.5 years. That's Charleston in South Carolina. So I received a bachelor's and then a licentiate, as we say, because we can't have normal terms in the philosophy of the church world. So a licentiate in philosophy from Catholic U in DC. And after 4.5 years, finishing those programs, departed and got one more master's degree. And this was not a licentiate, but just a normal master's in business, because we had to do something practical, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Everything can't be a useless art, as I'm sure we'll talk more about later. And then from there, just got moving in the direction to this career, staying here in South Carolina. My wife and I just had our first 10 months ago now, so time flies, and we're planted here in Columbia. So life is good, and excited to be a part of the group and be on my first podcast.
Wow, that's awesome. Praise God for that. Exciting news for you with your first Ravel the First. We just the other day, my oldest turned 9 on me, like 2 days ago, and they do grow up fast. So cherish those moments. It doesn't take long at all before you're needing to reprimand them for misbehaving. So, oh, you're already there. Oh, fun things. It's great to have them, but sometimes it makes you want to pull your hair out a little bit at the same time, if I'm honest. So, well, Nick, our conversation today was really just wanting to talk about philosophy and what kind of brought us into it. I think the reasons for each of us as to why we studied philosophy are the same. We had a background in formation. We're preparing for the priesthood and studying the seminary. And, folks, if you're not familiar with this, as part of a huge part of the intellectual formation of a seminarian is, as many as 30 credit hours in philosophy. You basically minor in it, whether you want to or not. It's mandated by the church. And then, you are allowed to pursue other, majors if, provided within the seminary. And so you wouldn't necessarily have to have a major in philosophy, and even more so a master's in it. But just because it gets so inundated in the environment, and it's really it was a great situation, because not just are you studying, pretty much everyone else that is going through similar coursework. It really became just great grounds for daily, nightly conversation on just stuff that was discussed that day or what's going on. And some of this is helping to study and prepare and understand the concepts that are being, gone after. But it's also like, now that you're being introduced to these questions, and sometimes that's how I think of philosophy. It's like sometimes they're questions that you may not have ever even thought about, or you would have naturally discovered or thought a need to discuss. You would have maybe just simply accepted them almost on a blind faith. But the point of philosophy is to discuss these questions, usually foundational questions, the items that kind of make up the brick and mortar of life, and explore whether or not they're right, or if they should be critiqued or adjusted. And and then you get to chat, debate, maybe disagree even amongst yourselves as to what you think that, what is right. It's a pursuit of truth, fundamentally. And, so Nick and I have this background shared through our time in the seminary. And, what we're wanting to do in our conversation today is just share a little bit about what philosophy is. Perhaps if you haven't heard, ever a conversation on that or even know what it is, it could be very possible you don't even know what it is. I didn't before I started to study it. But then also just to speak about how it is, although deeply abstract in a lot of ways, it's at the same time incredibly applicable and informative into, I think, our present careers. So just to hand it over to you, Nick, I mean, would you echo or share any of those sentiments? Like what was the early stages of studying philosophy like for you, way back when in your seminary formation?
Yeah, no, I think it was something I slowly came to love, but didn't think I probably would at first. I mean, you said it well, no one has a choice who's in seminary formation about taking philosophy. So it was probably the best major that I didn't know that I'd, want to have. So, really grateful to essentially be forced into having to study philosophy. And I think the first year or so was a lot of arm wrestling. I switched over from a military school and everything was very concrete and practical on the surface level. And that was really all there was to it. So moving over and studying philosophy and it not being practical, at least at first glance, I think it took some time to really get adjusted to writing, long-winded papers, responses, taking apart arguments. And it was something that I didn't know I'd really grow to like until, spending more time with it. I think, that's a normal thing, right? I mean, you can't pick up any, great work of literature or really any kind of higher science or anything without probably being turned away from it at first, seeing how challenging it might be or frustrating it might be as you first pick it up. But, you take a little bit at a time, you start to see that there are areas that are really beautiful and maybe something that personally you have, needed to learn and see and to unpack for your own kind of personal growth and edification. So, the more I was exposed to it, the more I had those conversations, like you said, being alongside other guys who are in the same stage of life, going through the same thing with the same goal at the end. It really provides a really healthy place for conversation. So I think that was part and parcel to me, really kind of being more comfortable with loving philosophy, was having those chances to maybe friendly debate is a good way of saying it. Sometimes friendly, maybe other times less charitably. But it really provided that scene where you could take the time to unpack concepts and wrestle with it with yourself, because especially I was early 20s. You're wrestling with everything, and it's a really healthy place to be able to do it under the confines of the church and people who have to be nice to you because that's part of the house rules. They over time grew to love it, and like you, took further steps to pursue a little further education and deeper dive into the master's side of things, which I think for me, maybe you can say something on your side then, but master's was plenty, I think, to talk about. I don't know. That would have been a lot for me.
Well, if I had to be honest, I think I would love to do doctoral studies, even maybe still today. But I think the deterrent always for me was, quite frankly, I was starting to wise up enough, at least on the financial implications of a doctorate in philosophy and the challenges of making a living off of that, and staying above water, because perhaps with no surprise for folks who might not be aware, there's actually a superabundance of philosophers, at least folks who have a PhD in philosophy, and finding work in that space that's gainful and meaningful is challenging, and so you almost by necessity have to migrate into other careers. And so that's somewhat of my own story as I was coming and moving from my time in the seminary and having studied philosophy, but also no longer on a pathway forward of becoming a priest. I was like, well, what is going to then be my career? Like, what do I do from here? And initially it was, to be an academic. Still a little bit in my heart for sure. But on the other hand, it's, that's not an easy, a straightforward arrangement either. There's plenty of challenges, but I've come to learn and know of through, conversations with other friends of mine who did continue on and are, studying philosophies. they're living a little bit of a bittersweet dream, if I dare say so, in that they love what they do and they love the conversations and they've been able to stay in all of that. But again, the financially, the means in which you can get paid isn't always the most abundant, so that there can be a toughness that you're pushing through. But those matters aside, my background, my interest wasn't even so much in philosophy. I think I was always maybe a little philosophical. I liked bigger questions, trying to grasp things such as infinity. But it was more framed within the notion of mathematics and science and what could math teach us. I think my strength lied more in the analytical side. But at the same time, I was fairly good in life sciences. And so, biology, physiology, anatomy, genetics, microbiology, any one of those things, I just ate that stuff up and was trying to learn more. So when I went into the seminary and started to learn more about these philosophical questions and was reading the ancient philosophers, such as Socrates, Plato, and the like, Aristotle. I was like, what on earth? Like, what am I reading here? Like,
right.
Like, why am I like, none of this I'm not learning. It doesn't make me, it's still at that time in the early weeks and months and maybe even years, I was wanting to be maybe a better chemist or a better physicist, perhaps, or a better biologist, or astronomy. I mean, any one of these sciences where almost just like you're just taking in information and just learning and absorbing it, hopefully as a sponge. But, there is theoretical exploration, I think, in all of those disciplines. But like at the very center of philosophy, like the whole pursuit of it is theoretical exploration. Like, why do we exist? Like, what does it mean to be? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be a human being? What's a good functioning society? What's a good friend? What would be a good marriage or good relationships? Like this continued exploration of the notion of good was certainly a center of my own philosophical thinking, but questions of being and existence and perhaps spiritual realities such as, a hierarchy of being between God and angels and demons and ourselves and maybe material reality. I mean, there's just like this whole exploration and just a questioning of like, can we make heads and tails of this, not just at different segments of history and the answers of that intellectual tradition for that period in time, but also the transformation of that intellectual tradition over time and making sense, not just of how people thought previous to us, but now also what modern thinking is and where maybe we're still in agreement or where we're contrary at. Like there's a full infusion of, if I dare say, like an understanding of human intelligence from the start to finish. And, where that goes, it is kind of a wide open, free ranging conversation. Maybe to speak a little bit to that, Nick, I mean, we talked a little bit beforehand, that philosophy isn't necessarily free ranging or just almost like an unschooled approach where you can say whatever you want like that. Most philosophers wouldn't agree with that. But, the conversation almost has no bounds on the other hand. I mean, what was your experience as you got introduced into the full spectrum, the areas of focus or specialty? There's a handful of folks, if you're not familiar within philosophy, like what really gravitated or spoke to you as you were learning some of these areas of concentration?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned on your side it was probably more biological or science-based for your interest. And I think mine was always ethics, really being able to know what is the right action, what's the best thing to do. How can a human be good and what does it mean for an action to be good? And, looking beyond just, well, I've been told to do this, so I should do this, or my faith or the church or religion dictates that I do this, so I should do this. And I think wanting to explore a little bit deeper of what makes somebody good, what makes an action good, beyond just following, simple precepts laid out in front of you by tradition. And, obviously someone just following tradition, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that there's a layer, at least in me, that wanted to know a little bit more of the why, and obviously the church teaches things that, at least in today's world, are pretty controversial and, might not make a lot of sense on the surface level to what the current practices of the day are. And, for me, it never felt like it was enough just to say, well, the church says so, or my faith says so. And again, not that that's not still a good thing to believe in and say, and religious liberties, religious freedoms, they're obviously important to defend in the public space. But, if you're talking to someone who is also a human being made by God, maybe not recognizing it, and has a belief in something that they think is a good action, there's something I should be able to say to be able to get to them that, hey, there's a better way for you to live that's actually better for you, and you're going to be happier if you live that way. And being able to unpack that more than, well, I'm Catholic, so this is why I do this, and maybe you'd understand if you were Catholic. That didn't really sit well with me. And I guess maybe maybe if I'm not confrontational, I'm always argumentative, even if just in my head. I walk through, what would I say to this person who I'm watching on TV or who I read, writing or saying this, and say, I know you think this is best, but have you looked at it this way? And I think that was the biggest draw for me, was really unpacking what does it mean to be good. And then, of course, ethics isn't a standalone, area. It has to be grounded by metaphysical principles and everything else that makes sense of why something is good, how it's good, what is goodness in the beginning. So I think that was kind of how I got to start with it. So it was, something that drew me in. And again, you can start with ethics, but then, like you said, you can go anywhere. Because again, like we just said, it's not much further off that you go from what's a good action to what is goodness. And that's kind of where you get to the core of philosophy, is this deeper what are questions that really take you anywhere, like you said. So ideally you're searching for the truth, right? And ideally there isn't, just any answer for what is good and what makes a good action. And there are bounds and reasons and something we can follow that you're pursuing for a particular truth. But the implications of that, of what is good and what goodness is and how we can live well, those can go anywhere. So I think it is this dichotomy of, needing to be grounded in some kind of single truth, reality, or understanding of existence, but also existence is pretty massive. So you should be able to reach pretty far with it. So I think we kind of came from different angles, but probably got to a very similar place in our endeavors.
No, I would agree very much, Nick. So, one of the things that's always stood out to me ever since the early days of my philosophical studies, and truly, this is one of the moments where maybe you would say the light bulb went off or things clicked, or I went like, wow, just wow. And this isn't the singular moment in which I went, wow. There's actually got to be, I think, probably quite a few of them, but some of this, as you're learning philosophy, it's its own language. It doesn't always make a lot of sense. You maybe struggle, especially in the early stages, to even understand why you're learning it, especially if your prior education or thinking of what education should be is just like an absorption of information and being able to recall it readily. And, how smart you are is your ability to, how quickly can you recall something and be right about it. Philosophy is like asking all these questions that seem almost deeply like unpractical and like, why? Why should I care? Why does this matter? But one of the things where it's like, wow, okay, like this is actually rather interesting and fascinating was in an intro to philosophy class in which we brought up the pursuit of, where a lot of philosophy is about pursuing truth, but maybe another way to describe that is pursuing substance or meaning or purpose or foundation. And, when making an argument, ones that ideally and probably rightly should be grounded by logic, because otherwise, what kind of argument do you have? It's, it's illogical. Is that really what you would want? What makes something logical? Like this notion of understanding and the connection that when we say to understand something, that's actually directly not just connected or having commonality, but it's like literally a literal translation of substance. To substance something means to understand. So to have understanding means I substance you, which on the face of it seems like bizarre because we just don't speak of it in that way. But that's literally what we mean when I say I understand you. And to then mean like if I'm going to argue for something, typically we'll see this even in my daily work with taxes, in which we'll be talking about, substantial services, or like you got to have a substantial argument. They'll throw that term out there with then like really no further explication as to what substance is in that. But like substantial means like it's got meat to it. Like this isn't just me willy-nilly wanting to do something on the surface. Basically, it's a rationalization in which I have, if you really push me, I really have no argument to make. I'm just hoping you'll let me get away with it. It's preferentially based. So no, I can sit down and talk with you at length and lay out my argument in detail for why I think again, maybe more practically, we should take this position, within the tax code. But, that preceded in my own intellectual formation in, philosophical argument. Like that's what came away from this was us all discussing ourselves and being forced to be like, you can't just say something. Like, who cares? Like, back it up. Like, defend yourself. Like, give me reasons for why that is right. And I'm not going to let you off easy. Like, I really want you to convince me, persuade me for what you're saying is true. And boy, I tell you what, when you're really pushed and challenged with that, and you spend literally years of being challenged to be like, that's the standard and you need to hold to this, or, we're going to say you don't have a good argument. Sorry, but I'm not listening to you. Like, dang, like, the gauntlet's been thrown. And what you have to do in response to that as a matter of articulation and communication and clarity and just like a wrestling in your mind to try to straighten all this stuff out and make sense of it. It's the very birth of critical thinking. And that, I think, we haven't talked much about the practical applications of philosophy, but I think, if anything, someone who has a background in philosophy, if they've really been challenged in the way that I've been describing it, at least, and that's how it was for me, for sure, like that is what's going to come away. Like it has to come away, because in our modern society, a lot of people just let you go. You could say anything and want, and no one's going to challenge you and push you. In fact, it was a big change for me of getting away from, actually I can't be so confrontational. It's not, I'm out of that philosophical domain. But, what I bore away from that was I don't take anything, lightly. Like everything that I'm looking at is constantly being examined. And as much as I'm looking for substance to defend myself, I'm looking for substance in other people's arguments. And I'm not going to just take your position just because it would be nice, for you, because somehow you would appreciate it. Like, if you want me to take your position, you better give me a good argument. So maybe just to kick that over a little bit to you, Nick, specifically on this line of critical thinking. I mean, would you agree? I mean, is that one of the takeaways that you've seen as part of your study of philosophy?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think, just being able to come at something that's real and objective, and it's not a matter of a fun words game, if we disagree on definitions, that's fine, but let's work to agree to some kind of definition to then get to a solution together, right? Because people use words in so many ways, and we don't have to agree on every word, but let's try to agree on a word, and then we can get somewhere together. And I think that's ultimately, I think, what the philosophical endeavor should be. Not so much a matter of, berating other people with showing how smart you are over them and beating them in their arguments or making them look silly, but really a quest together to arrive at some kind of truth together, right? I mean, we're going back to the ancient writings and how Plato wrote about Socrates. Maybe he, made fun of some folks here and there, but the idea was to get everybody arriving at the truth together. And if anything, he was just a guide by asking good questions. Like you mentioned, asking questions really goes a long way. And if you're being asked a question, you want to be on your A game for your response. And, asking someone else a question can help them arrive at whatever you're trying to help them get to. So I think that's a big part of it, in that it's supposed to be, I think, a really unitive joint effort of arriving at something together so that everybody is better off. And I think that's maybe something we struggle with today in terms of having an argument is the idea that we're on the same team going to the same end goal, which is betterment, joy, goodness, truth for everybody. So I think that's always the approach that you take. And again, you can see that certainly in our line of work, right? If we are on the same team as our clients, trying to arrive at the best solution, the best decision making, the best approach to a financial plan or strategy, we're not trying to, whirl around them, showing them how much we know about this or that and how much they don't know, but we're really trying to be an educator, a guide, make sense of something and really help them with us, arrive at the right outcome. And it not being confrontational, but really being a joint quest to arrive at a jointly beneficial, good outcome. I think is something that we can really take forward from our experiences, and something I think the world could benefit from, and something that I know I don't do perfectly all the time in my day in, day out. So it really makes a difference when you're on that same page working together to have that same outcome.
Well, I am glad you're able to kind of temper some of what I had to say. I mean, perhaps my own personality and even character failings are coming through. But I mean, for me, a lot of philosophy was about being right. And I do think that to be, I think that is the pursuit of philosophy, a pursuit of truth is kind of at the heart of philosophy. But, one of the things I have learned, and I think it's to echo some of your sentiments, is look, as much as we can make a stronger argument for any number of things, and as much as I can find it compelling or convincing, and really think like, look, I think I've got a strong argument here. The receptivity that people have, everyone's at different stages and different moments in their life. And, maybe the fruit just isn't ripe, as one way to describe it. They're just not ready to hear what you have to say. And you can't, this is one of the things I think I realized more post my philosophical studies is reason will only take us so far. And even though it's rationally guided, people's willingness to hear you out and agree with you, there tends to be other things that will come up into play as barriers, and you have to meet, people with where they're at and understand and appreciate them. And yeah, we can definitely only agree to disagree or be polite or accepting of that. But, I think what's probably stood out to me as one of the chief differences as I've gone on to study other things is as much as we are as humans rational, and we do have an intellectual history, especially as Catholics, that is deeply rational. And I think well-founded and can be well argued. We're not as in our functioning in our day-to-day lives. A lot of our operations aren't rationally driven. Like they're more driven perhaps out of habit or simplicity or not wanting, we want to keep the waters calm and peaceful. We don't want to, make a mess of things. And so, the willingness for someone to go and be rational or get into things analytically, even myself now, to be honest, now that I'm outside of philosophical matters and it's just not something my brain is readily involved in, it's like, I don't know, I'm just trying to pay the bills, like what's the right thing for me to do with my money so that I'm okay? And, these things are interesting questions, but, can we ever exhaust them? And just the sheer fact that the questions in some ways don't go away, like the perennial questions that keep coming back, year after year, generation after generation with us as humans, maybe speaks to them as being more part of our humanity than like a problem to be solved, right? Like us just simply asking it is what it is for us to be human. Us maybe, solving that maybe isn't actually we just need to ask the question, and that's as far as it goes. I'm kind of curious just to spend a little time with you kind of post philosophy, and especially as we think of migrating into financial services. Like, have you had a similar, where do you find the philosophical impact still playing itself out? But where have you maybe had to just put the books away or just be like, well, that was fun, but now I'm on to new things? Like, what's it like been post philosophy for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think in some ways you never really drop it. If a philosophical habit of mind is formed, then, and ideally it is formed, it's not something that you're just regurgitating or reciting because it's, your latest interest. But if it's a habit of mind that you've really developed, then, in some sense you don't lose it or leave it. But maybe how it's applied looks different on a regular basis. So, I'm not arguing with my peers in the seminary hallway way too late at the night about, the better way of understanding Thomas in this one question. It's not my norm anymore.
Sounds fun. Right.
It used to be.
Well, we could start that again at some point, Nick. But move it on.
Save that for another podcast. But having a conversation with a client who has an understandable kind of past with their usage of money, and you're able to bring in all the different, kind of philosophical elements of what are they battling intellectually, what's going on emotionally that is, for better or for worse, affecting their reason, and then what is coming through and what their disposition is in terms of presenting this approach of this or that option. Is this something that they're being incredibly rational on, which, there's always the joke about the engineers being the hardest clients because they analyze and assess everything very rationally and non-emotionally. Then you have the other extreme of someone who's very, scared or incredibly, friendly with risk and trying to say that there's maybe a middle ground to be able to step on, but you know that there's emotions that come to play with those dispositions as well. I think, in building this philosophical habit of mind, you're always kind of sifting out where is reason, where is lack of reason. So I think while I've left a lot of the books and the latest arguments, and I certainly can't, regurgitate a lot of the Aristotle that maybe I could when I was taking my oral comprehensive exams. I like to think at least that I've retained a lot of the philosophical habit of mind that has carried forward with me. And then just use that as a foundation for the next thing. Because, even during formation, and for you as well, Ben, philosophy was supposed to be kind of the stepping stool or the foundation for theology, right? You weren't looking to have, at least I wasn't, and most diocesan priests aren't, you weren't looking to have philosophy be the end all be all. It was a matter of laying the groundwork for good theology, because as grace builds on nature, the supernatural builds on the natural. So having that be a wonderful foundation is great, but there's then something that needs to be stepped up above that, right? And that's whatever way in which you're called to use what you've gained and learned for good. So we call philosophy obviously a useful skill, a useful area of knowledge or expertise, in that it's not directly useful for something else, right? You can't, change a light bulb with your philosophical knowledge. It's not
Right.
per se. But if you've built up that philosophical habit of mind, it really does apply, I think, to everything that you do, even if it's not something that's directly associated with philosophical inquiry or, academia or anything like that. So while I've certainly, left behind a lot of my heavy reading days, heavy writing days, and left a lot of my emotional attachment to, being up there with the other seminarians in terms of argumentation and ability to be right, I do think I'm proud to be able to carry forward the habit of mind that's developed into my work life, but also my personal life and my family life too. So.
Yeah, no, I think you say that so well, Nick. There really is like an imprint, that having, now that you've raised these sort of questions and been introduced into this realm of, exploration, investigation, but maybe debate, and argumentation, once you've kind of gone that deep on foundational questions, you tend to want to keep going back to that. You don't really settle for a shallow answer, to be honest. And so, you may not still stay. I certainly have not stayed well read up on philosophical arguments, and it's,
Nope.
no. I just honestly, I just don't have the time for it. I've migrated on into another discipline, but having established that as the standard, I think that without question, that has stayed, and then maybe to a point that we haven't, extrapolated, as a term we used to use back in in our college days. Yep. Woo, here we go. I shall throw that term around a little bit. Yeah. Articulating and being communicative. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do is write a philosophy paper, and not just one of them, but one after another, and then write a whole thesis, 70 or 80 or 90 pages. I don't remember what it was on a matter. And having this high standard of being able to introduce this to somebody where they understand you, they're following what it is that you have to say, and then you're walking them through your argument. That seems easy enough to do when you've just running that argument around in your head. But now when you have to put it out on paper and say it to someone else, I don't know if anyone could really appreciate how difficult writing a philosophy paper is until you're it's due and I expect a 10-page paper, and, cite yourself and make your argument. That was such a struggle in the early stages of writing. And it got easier, I will say, although if I had to go back to it right now, I would probably struggle mightily to get right back into it. But one of the comments that I commonly get from both team members and other advisors and clients is, Ben, I just really appreciate how thorough you are when you explain yourself. And I just have to say, there's without question, where do I get that from? It's from, all those years of studying philosophy and writing philosophy, that really it just, if you wanted to do well in that, you had to be thorough, and you had to provide plenty of detail, or people just got lost. The thing that's stuck from me is still this philosophical puzzle that still amazes me, and I've hit upon it already a few times, but just this whole notion of understanding, but like the contrast of that of misunderstanding, and how easy it is for us to misunderstand each other and to talk past each other and to not follow. Like the world is so easy to misunderstand. Like if I really want someone to grasp, like comprehend, which is what comprehend literally means, is to grasp something. If I want them to grasp what I mean, I have to do a job, a responsibility of really explaining myself so that they can follow me. And if they're not following me, then I haven't done my job sufficiently well. And so I think, if we're looking at practical applications of like, hey, like where have I benefit, but maybe more so my clients have benefited from my background in that. I think these are where I would start to say I stand apart, or someone with a philosophical background would stand apart because they tend to be very good communicators. So what are your thoughts, Nick? Do you think similarly?
I do. Yeah. And I think there's something about clarity and articulation that really go a long way in any kind of profession that involves communicating with people. I think the worst thing that you can do is have someone step away. I think this is worse than if they disagree with you, but the worst thing is that they just didn't understand what you were trying to present, or they didn't understand what you were trying to help them with, or they didn't understand the concept. And of course, there are degrees of understanding, right? I mean, I don't expect everyone to understand everything about investment strategy or everything about insurance planning or anything like that, because, well, first off, I don't. But,
fair enough.
Well, there's only so much you really need to know to make a good decision.
Right.
But you want them to walk away with the knowledge that they should have been able to have to be able to make a proper decision, and whether or not they make it according to what you think is the right decision, just giving them the tools to be able to say, I understand what I need to know, and here I can now make a reasonable decision based on that. I'd rather have someone disagree with me than misunderstand me. So, I think that's part of just taking pride in those roots we talked about, and wanting to be articulate and clear and have it be something that someone else can take and digest. And, I think the par excellence example of difficulty there is a philosophy paper, right? Because you're already writing about, abstract things. You're having to define pretty much every other word. So if you're unclear in a philosophy paper, it shows. But if you can be clear in a philosophy paper, you can be pretty clear in something else that's a little more tangible and that has maybe definitions outside of what you give them. So I think that's something that's, a really important piece to me, and it sounds like it is to you as well. Just having clients understand what different tools, resources, strategies look like, so that they can follow and make a decision appropriately. So, communication goes a long way, and having that as the core element of what you're trying to do with clarity and precision of language really takes you far. And I think then you said too that you come out of school, you get your doctorate in philosophy. You're going to be teaching, and if not, you're probably not going to be doing much else with that degree. Yeah. Well, I think that's indicative of the fact that whoever is walking out with these degrees is going to be teaching in some capacity. And if anybody, again, needs to be articulate and clear about what they're presenting, it's teachers. And, I'd argue to you that we teach every day, and there's a lot that our students, our clients aren't necessarily aware of, to no fault of their own, right? We've kind of made this our specialty, but it is our job to then be able to break it down and to be able to present to them at, a digestible level for where they are, and take it in and make a decision. And of course, too, you can talk to, carrying on the school analogy, in the same day, you can talk to, someone who's more learned than you in one area, and then 1 hour later, you're talking to, a pre-K version of a finance major, So I think it goes a long way to be able to meet everyone where they are, to be that teacher, and to be able to have that background of being able to articulate and be clear of, what it is we're trying to arrive at. So I think it's something I've been able to see kind of live out on this side of the walls there.
For sure. No, I must say at times I've had mixed feelings about studying philosophy, and so intensely going on to get a master's degree, because it isn't so immediately applicable. And so you do come out away from that. And unless you're, again, largely if you're not teaching, it's like, well, okay, now what am I going to do to make money with this? And, there have been times, especially as I've met with other clients, and you take more established professional career paths of being a lawyer or a dentist or medicine or, even an accountant, where like the education you received specifically prepared you to be able to do that work later on. And like, I didn't necessarily have that, studying philosophy. I just spent a lot of time asking questions and raising them and wrestling with them and discussing those ideas with other people. But all that to say, I've also come to appreciate just how unique that background is. And as much as other people perhaps get a leg up by going more directly into their discipline and learning the ins and outs of it in their early college days, their willingness or desire to go deeper and explore and, figure things out and try to make sense of things. I don't feel the stamina is much there. And I would credit, my philosophical background, because again, in the early stages for me, like I didn't want to do this either. Like I was like, why are we spending all this time here? But with it almost being really forced upon me, like there has been a deep appreciation of like, actually this is the kind of irony of life. Like this actually was rather good for me, even though I didn't see it immediately. And I'm glad, I'm thankful that I did this. And even though it wasn't like an obvious transition as to what am I going to do now, the strength that, has come away from that I think has made itself clear and known. And I'm appreciative of it. And when even not just appreciative, but I would encourage it to, there is always, philosophers tend to come from wealthier backgrounds because of just the sheer practicality. But look, right. If you don't have money and, this doesn't really translate well into making money, you may not, you're going to be a very poor philosopher maybe if you stay with it. So most philosophers come from, have the liberty, the freedom they don't have to be so practical in their life decisions. But I mean, if you have the ability, maybe just as a word for our audience, to encourage someone to study philosophy and or at least have some of that, like I don't think I could encourage it enough. It's one of those really great disciplines that easily goes unnoticed in today's society and is well undervalued. Like if you want a big bang for your buck, take some philosophy classes and, have some of these challenges that we've discussed, placed upon you. I think, yourself or your children, whoever it may be in play, will be better off. Like these are good things, for us to do. So maybe it was just some of those thoughts. I mean, as you look over in terms of your own, philosophical background, I mean, would you do it all over again, Nick? What's your thoughts?
I think I would. And I agree with you in that. Maybe you have felt this way too. Just you feel a little bit behind some of your peers who had a jump start into the industry, and you think, oh my goodness, how do they already know all this stuff? I feel behind.
Yeah.
And not that it's not true, because in some ways, sure, they know more things, but I still think there's a great benefit to having such a strong foundation. And I think, not spending too much time talking about this, but liberal arts education, the goal is to build this strong foundation of being a well-rounded student, knowing what goodness and truth and beauty is on a broad scale. So then, as you specialize, you're grounded in this strong foundation. And that's something that, some of our Catholic schools across the country still really embody and take very seriously. And I've been blessed to, have traversed through a couple of them. But, I think that sense is lost today because we're so competitive, and we're always comparing side by side, who's further ahead. As I just said it, I feel like I'm behind some of my peers. But that sentiment, doesn't really need to exist, because what's the race towards, right? Am I trying to beat them at being an advisor somehow, as if there's a real way to compete? It doesn't actually make sense. So, I take a step back and realize, well, what's the whole point of learning and taking education? It's really to form you as a person. And again, that's very literal and explicit within seminary formation, but it's something that I think, our culture, our society, and certainly our church at large can really benefit from and lean into, because we're so busy. We just look to produce, and I think there's a lot out of just appreciating things for their own sake. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think part of that too is just remembering why we're doing what we're doing. And it's not just for the work and for the income, but, and my family, my wife and my siblings and in-laws and all of that, I think there's something I can provide to them by just having this, frankly, this rare education, to be able to have these kinds of discussions. And, I hope to be able to bring that to my son as he gets older, and any more children that we might have. And, my wife might sometimes be on board with my philosophical background. Depending on what the context is of our conversation, she likes it more than other times. But, it's done more for me than just help me be a good advisor, although I do think it has done that. So it's, just kind of being able to take a step back from, sure, it's helped me to be a very articulate advisor and know what's, focus on what's most important in my clients' lives and, help them live the optimal good life as it might be discussed in philosophy. But at the end of the day, too, I just think it's made me a better man, a better husband, a better father, and a better man at the church. And I'm grateful to have landed back in my diocese because they're the ones who've invested so much in me with my seminary formation for me to ultimately not be ordained. But, it's very much my intention to be still a service to the diocese and be able to provide this rare education and do it for more than just myself, and provide ways to be able to use some of that to be able to bring fruit outside of just, my income or my profession. And I think something like philosophy really can run through a lot of territories, and it's not just confined to whatever your 9 to 5 is, but it can really be a gift to the community because you've been exposed to these things that, most people haven't in terms of our regular education. So maybe a long-winded response, but I think there's a lot that we have to offer from that background that goes certainly directly to work, but also beyond, even if it can't be measured literally.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, one could argue, and maybe quite rightly, that philosophy is education. Like, to the extent that you've had philosophical conversations in classes and an introduction to these subject matters, like we're really actually getting at the very heart of what education is all about. And, I think in that light, if I am right in that observation, then one might even say, so boldly that we're some of the most educated that you'll come across. And so I have an appreciation. I appreciate, my clients who are physicians, and I have obviously deep technical knowledge. And, if I am sick, they can take good care of me. So I wouldn't want to be naysaying anything of their background. But,
Certainly.
I don't think that the two are the same, in terms of what's been learned and taught and the imprint or the lasting impact that's been had. And so as appreciable as I am for that specialization, there's something to be said for the breadth of exploration that took place at the outset. So, folks, if you're looking to work with somebody who's got, either a philosophy background or maybe a liberal arts background, there's a good number of members in the Catholic Financial Planners Network who certainly have that. Would encourage you to reach out to, maybe one of those advisors. But, if someone has, been, had your interest piqued with Nick, again, Nick, where can folks find you if they'd like to follow up and, continue the conversation that we've had today?
Yeah, well, I'm happily listed on the Catholic Financial Planners Network website. My phone number and email address are on there. I do a little bit on LinkedIn, so if folks want to connect there or follow there, I do a few posts and try to keep it somewhat philosophical on there as well. So those are, the best ways to find me, and really excited to be able to connect with folks from here.
All right. Well, Nick, thanks for that. Again, folks, check Nick out with Calmwater Advisors, either with Catholic Financial Planners Network or their company's website. And Nick's located there in Columbia, South Carolina. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to him if you're outside the state. But thanks so much, Nick, for being on the show. I think we'll maybe title this like a reflection of two philosophers on philosophy, or something, and it would be very appropriate. But everyone, I hope you really found some value in this, especially if you've never, studied philosophy, you don't even know what it is. Obviously we didn't go into great detail about it, but it's like the practical takeaways. I definitely think we explore quite a bit of what philosophy can do for someone as an educational piece. And, even if you're not able to take a course in it per se, maybe you can pick up a few books on the matter. It's one of those things that I would just encourage that everyone spend some time with, as part of their own intellectual formation. So, Nick, thanks again for being on the show and sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to reconnection with you again at a future call. And everyone else, God's blessings to you.
It's been a pleasure.